The PF5 basic design, basically what we want to do with this machine, we want to exchange the old fluid that's in the transmission with new fluid. We're going to use the PF5 to do that. The PF5 has several features, makes it a little bit unique. First thing, the PF5 has a rectifier block. No matter how we're hooked up to the system, the transmission system, the rectifier block is going to sense which direction the fluid is coming to the machine and direct it the right direction each time. As the fluid comes to the machine, the rectifier block is going to direct the fluid to the bottom of the tank. This tank, we've got three sizes of tanks. We've got a 12-quart tank, a 16-quart tank, and a 28-quart tank. This happens to be a 16-quart tank. The tank has a rubber bladder in the bottom of it. Basically, as the fluid is being pumped to the bottom of the tank, it's going to push the bladder up, and the new fluid is going to be going back to the vehicle. As that's happening, we've got an indicator right on top of the tank. That's going to be one way we're going to tell when the service is complete. As the service is completed, basically what's going to happen as the new fluid or the old fluid gets to the top of the tank, it's not going to have anywhere to go. So basically the pressure will back up on the system and go through a bypass valve. The bypass valve is going to open, and basically we're going to see a 15-pound drop between the two gauges. When that happens, that's going to tell you that the service is complete. If you're not 100% sure, once again we can look at our indicator on top of the tank. If the indicator's up, that's telling us that the service is complete. Another feature that we've got with the machine, as we're doing this service, we've got a heat exchanger. The heat exchanger basically, as the old fluid is coming to the machine, it's heating the new fluid going back to the vehicle. That does two things. One, it cools the old fluid coming to the bottom of our bladder, actually where we don't have as much heat on our bladder. That way it makes the bladder, allows the bladder to last longer. And two, it heats the new fluid going back to the vehicle, so that the new fluid so we're not putting like 70-degree transmission fluid in a 250-degree transmission. Just helps us eliminate any problems that could arise by putting cold fluid in a hot transmission. Another thing we've basically got a flow gauge, a flow meter right here. That basically, after you get some experience with doing flushes on particular transmissions, say you get hooked up to a Chevy truck and you're used to having 20 to 30 pounds on the gauges and say 0.8 to 1 gallons per minute flow. You know, if you hook up to that particular transmission and you're getting lower pressures and lower flow than that, then it kind of gives you an idea that you might be having a problem with that transmission. Just a little indicator of how the condition of the transmission is. To do a service with the PF5, basically what we want to do two things. First of all, what we want to do, we want to fill the machine. We've got two methods of filling the machine. One, we can pressure fill going through our recharge port on the side of the machine, or two, we can manually fill going through a manually fill funnel on top of the machine. Once we get the machine full of the appropriate fluid, then we want to get hooked up to the vehicle. Getting hooked up to the vehicle, we've got a whole series of fittings that come with the machine. We find the appropriate fitting. We want to break into the cooler system of the transmission. You can go in at the radiator, you can go in at the transmission, you can go out anywhere in between them two. You just got to find a spot to get into the cooler loop of the transmission. Basically, once we get our lines, we break the line, we get our fittings on there, we take our two service hoses and we put it on our two fittings. Basically what that does is put our machine in the cooler loop of the transmission. Once we get it into the cooler loop of the transmission, we're going to start the vehicle. We're going to start the vehicle with the machine in bypass. Basically what we want to do there, we want to make sure that we don't have any leaks, and also we want to make sure that we've got fluid flow, and that we've got everything's doing what it's supposed to do. Once we identify once we know that everything's going good, we're going to go ahead and put the machine into process. Like I was telling you earlier, the fluid is going to be directed to the bottom of our tank. It's going to push the bladder up. The bladder is going up. It's going to push the new fluid back to the vehicle. Once again, when the bladder gets to the top of the tank, our indicator is going to come up, like I was telling you. Our indicator is going to come up. Once the bladder gets to the top of the tank, the indicator comes up. You can't put any more fluid in there. Once that happens, the pressure backs up on the system. It's going to open our bypass valve. We're also going to see a 10 to 15 pound pressure drop in our gauges, and the service is done. After that, basically what we want to do is we want to check the fluid level in the transmission, making sure that it's everything, making sure that the fluid level's fine. If the fluid level's over, then we've got a little ball valve right here where we can take fluid out of the transmission. It's a lot easier to take fluid out of the transmission by using this ball valve over here while you're hooked up than it is to try to pull fluid out of the dipstick. If we're low, that's no big deal because we can always add transmission fluid without the use of the machine. After we identify that the fluid level's fine, basically we're going to shut off the vehicle, we're going to disconnect, hook the vehicle all back together, and we're going to start back up, make sure we don't have any leaks, and the service is complete. The first thing we need to do with the PF5, we need to either, if the machine's used, we need to recharge the machine, or the machine's brand new, what we're going to have to do is an initial charge. To initially charge the machine, this is a brand new machine, what we're going to have to do, when we get it, we're not 100% sure where the bladder is in the tank. One of our indications of where the bladder is the indicator on top of the tank. The indicator is down, so that tells us either one, the bladder is all the way to the bottom of the tank, or it's halfway up. We're not 100% sure. So what we're going to do to make sure that we know where the bladder is, we're going to initial charge. We're going to blow the bladder all the way up, then we're going to blow the bladder all the way to the bottom, and then we're going to fill it. So to blow the bladder all the way up, we've got to go through the purge port. Purge port's on the inside of the machine. We're going to put the machine in purge. We've got to get us an adapter so we can have an open-ended hose. It doesn't matter which service hose we use. We've got to have a jug. Basically what happens is when we put air to the bottom of that tank, it's going to push the bladder up. The air on the top side of that bladder has got to have some place to go. So we've got to have an open-ended adapter on one of our service hoses. I'm going to take our recharge adapter. Going to put it on our purge port on the inside of the machine. Once again, we want to make sure we got our indicator or our ball valve on purge. What we're going to do is we're going to put air to it. Basically, we want to put air to it. We want to watch our use gauge. We don't want our use gauge to get over about 40 to 50 pounds. So what we're watching for our indicator on top of the tank to come up. Our indicators come up. Our new gauge went to 0. Our use gauge stopped at 15 pounds. We know the bladder's at the top of the tank. So we're going to go to pressure release. The use gauge gets to 0. I'm going to put the machine in recharge. I'm going to take our recharge adapter. I'm going to put it on the recharge port on the side of the machine. Then what we're going to do is we're going to blow the bladder to the bottom of the tank. We know the bladder's to the bottom of the tank. When the use gauge goes to 0, the new gauge goes to 50. It stops. Everything should just stop. Take the air off the machine. We're going to go to pressure release. We want both gauges to go to 0 and stop. As soon as both gauges go to 0 and stop, we're ready to fill the machine. We're down to 0. I'm going to put the machine back into bypass. And we're ready to fill the machine. There's two methods of filling the machine. One, we could either, we're going to manually fill the machine. Most of the time the machines are manually filled. We're going to go right through our funnel here. What we're going to do is as we're pouring, we're going to open our ball valve as we're pouring ATF through the funnel. We're going to open our ball valve here on the side of the machine. And how we know that the machine is full is as we're pouring fluid into the funnel here. As soon as we get fluid coming out of the side vent here, going through that clear hose, then we know the machine's full. Another method is we can pressure fill. If we pressure fill the system, basically what we can take is a pressurized source of ATF, bulk fluid, and we just adapt it to our recharge port here. And what we can do when we have the bladder to the top of the tank with the indicators up, we do is just put our pressurized ATF to the side to the recharge port, turn on our pressurized ATF, and it'll bulk fill the machine. As it's filling the machine, it's going to put ATF to the recharge port to the top of the bladder, and it's going to push the bladder down at the same time that it's filling the machine. So the machine was used, you just done a service, and you bulk fill, if you pressure fill the machine, you can drain and fill the machine at the same time. But since we're going to manually fill the machine, we blew the bladder to the bottom of the tank. That way we can just put fluid in here, and once again, we know the machine's full when we start getting fluid out of our side vent through this clear hose. So we've got our ball valve, both ball valves open. We know the bladder's to the bottom of the tank, so we're going to go ahead and fill the machine. This is a 4-gallon container of fluid. We've got a 4-gallon tank, so we should be able to just fill the machine, put all the contents of this box right into the machine. Make sure our funnel's empty. We're going to close our ball valve. If we were using quarts, we'd continue to put quarts of fluid in there until we had fluid come out the side here. We've got the machine all filled up. Next thing we need to do is move to the vehicle, perform the service. First thing we need to do, we need to add our quick clean to the transmission. After we add our quick clean, we either want to do one of two things. We want to take the vehicle for a drive, or we want to put the vehicle on a lift and run it through the gears, get the quick clean throughout the entire transmission system. We want to run the vehicle through all the gears. If you got the vehicle in the air, run it through the gears. Before you put it in park, you want to make sure you put on the brakes, stop the wheels completely. Next thing we want to do is hook the machine up to the vehicle. We want to locate a position on the cooler, the cooling system, the cooler loop of the transmission. We want to break into the system either at the transmission or the radiator. On this vehicle, we're going to go in at the radiator. We want to identify the appropriate adapters. Through experience, I know that number 17 and 32 is going to fit this vehicle. So we've got to disconnect the line. We've got a male and female fitting. Of course, we want to tighten our fittings. One feature we have with the PF5 that makes it a little bit more convenient, with each adapter we could either have a straight or a 90. If you're having difficulty getting to a particular fitting or using the straight, we've got a 90 that'll assist in getting the PF5 hooked to the vehicle. Next, we want to hook our service hoses to the machine. It doesn't matter. Once again, we've got a rectifier block. As you can see, if I put this on straight, I'm going to be rubbing the belt. So I need to get me another 90-degree fitting. Once again, it doesn't matter which hose goes where. The machine's going to flow the right direction every time. I'm going to place the machine where I can see it. I'll make sure we're in bypass. I'm going to start the vehicle. I want to have a visual of the machine when I start the vehicle. Make sure that we got pressure, make sure we got flow, make sure everything's going as it's supposed to go. As I'm watching my machine, I see the pressure's going up, and I see we have flow. The fluid that we see right now, since we're in bypass, is the fluid that's in the transmission. One thing we want to check, make sure that all our fittings are on, they're correct, make sure that we're not getting any leaks at our fittings. Everything seems to be going good. We don't have any leaks, we got pressure, we got flow, so we're going to go ahead and put the machine in process. As we can see, we've got about 0.5 gallons per minute. We've got a 4-gallon tank, so it's going to take around 8 to 10 minutes to do the service. While we're doing the service, what we want to do is we've got the vehicle on the lift, we want to go ahead and get in there and run it through the gears again. That way we can flush out the valve body and the entire transmission system. I'm going to keep a visual on the machine, make sure all's going well. I'm going to run it through all gears just like we did earlier. We're going to watch the machine. There's going to be two ways that we're going to know that the service is done. One, we're going to watch our gauges. When we see a 10 to 15 pound split in the gauges, that's going to tell us that our service is done. Another way we're going to be able to tell if we're looking at the gauges and we're not 100% sure whether the service is done or not, we can always look at the indicator on top of the tank. If the piston's up on the top of the tank, then we know the service is done. The bladder's all the way to the top of the tank. A few things about the machine. This machine runs 100% off the transmission, the pump of the vehicle. There's no pumps, there's no nothing in the machine. So everything that's going on is going on 100% from the vehicle. Okay? The machine is a positive displacement machine. Anything that comes out of the vehicle gets replaced. So when we started the machine, the fluid level that was on the vehicle to begin with should be exactly the same as when we're done. What we want to do, we want to keep watching our machine. One of the best things about the machine is if we do get called away for a phone call or we get called away from the vehicle, when the service is done, this machine will go into bypass. So actually it could sit there and run all day long and not hurt anything. That's one of the good aspects of the machine. Once you get the machine going, once you got it in process, you've got the quick connects. Obviously, you've made sure you don't have any leaks. Everything's going like it's supposed to. You can technically walk away from the machine, and the machine will work just fine. As you can see, the service is about complete. Our piston is up all the way in our sight glass. The next thing we want to come up and watch our gauges. Our new gauge should drop, and our used gauge should rise. We'll have about a 10 to 15 pound differential between the two gauges. We do have the split. We're down to about 5 pounds here, about 15 pounds there. That tells us that our service is complete. Once again, if we wasn't 100% sure by looking at our gauges, we can always look at our indicator on top of the tank. the pistons all the way up to the top of the indicator, that tells us that the service is complete. We know the service is complete. What we want to do is put the machine back into bypass. Next thing what we want to do is disconnect from the vehicle. The first thing we're going to do before we disconnect, we want to check the fluid level and make sure that it's okay. Like I said earlier, if the fluid level's too high, we can always bring some fluid out our side vent right here. What we're going to do is check our level. Our fluid level looks good. You go ahead and turn the vehicle off and disconnect. Want to go to pressure release on the machine. Make sure both gauges are to 0. Then we can disconnect. Pull our fittings off. Hook the line back up to the vehicle. What we want to do is start the vehicle and check the fluid one more time. We're going to go ahead and add our conditioner, and then we'll check our fluid. Fluid level looks good. Next thing we would do is we'd either take the machine and recharge it, get it ready for the next service. We'd either, like I was talking about earlier, we'd either manually fill it. If we was going to manually fill it, at this time we'd put air to our recharge port with an open-ended hose, blow the bladder down to get all the old fluid out of it. If we're going to pressure fill it, we would just put our pressure ATF right to our recharge port. Of course, we put the machine in recharge. Like I was saying earlier, as we're pressure filling it, we're going to shove fluid into the top side of the bladder, pushing the bladder down, draining and filling it at the same time.